Greetings, everyone. This is Ed Pugh here at Reaper Miniatures. Today, we're going to discuss the Vex. We're going to completely disassemble it. We're going to reassemble it. We're also going to discuss the cleaning of it as we go along, any maintenance, any specialty issues to look out for, how to use it, or at least the function and adjustments that there are for you to play with. And I'm ready to get started. So first, what we're going to do is show you what you get when you order one, when you receive one. There should be a tag on the box that you'll have to snip. You'll find that when we snap and we open this, that there is this color. You'll need this if you need to call in if there's something wrong when you receive it. It's broken, missing parts, anything like that. You'll need this plus the card, a number on a card that's on the inside of here. So I grabbed this one on the way out. One we'll need to make sure, and hopefully it's got everything it needs. So far it looks good. So what we're going to first off is here's the airbrush itself in its bag. You'll have an inspection card. You're also going to have the two needles that go into it. One is black, one has a silver tip, okay? The difference is the fine versus the medium, or whichever the pattern that you're looking for. You'll obviously have the airbrush, and then you should, at that point, that's it for that. Now, you're going to have your bag. We'll go over that. Here's the card I was talking about. Thank you for your purchase. You'll need this number and that color when you send your email. Then here's a diagram, just description with the parts and their part numbers for the airbrush. So that's what you'll receive. Now, when you first open it up, you're going to have this blue tape that's on the trigger. What happens is the needle itself actually captures the airbrush. Make sure it's set up to take it. So when you put this needle in to go through the airbrush, it's actually going to go through the trigger itself. That's what captures and holds it in place. So without the needle in there for shipping, you'll need to make sure before you pull that off. Now, when you go to change your needle, obviously this is not there anymore, and it's a one-time use, so you're not going to be able to keep reusing it. What you'll just do is make sure that you're going to hold it up like this, that you don't really mess with it, and it'll sit there idle. It's not sprung in any way. So you'll be able to change. And if you accidentally do get it out of whack, I'm going to show you what you have to do to put it back. So anyway, we're going to pull this out. Now, anytime I pull the needles out, I always make sure I put them back in. So they're covers. So I'm going to pack this back away. So we can go back over there, and then we'll dig out our other airbrush. So while I'm at this point, I want to discuss with y'all the warranty. So what we are doing is any item, on the airbrush, at any time, you can send it in, and we will go through it, and we will fix whatever your problem is and address it and get it going and refurbed, okay? You pay the shipping to us. We pay the shipping back to you. There's no charge for the parts or the labor to fix it. That is assuming that we don't have any abuse. If there's abuse is identified, then you'll just be getting a phone call or an email so that we can discuss what's happening, how to prevent it, and see what's going on and things like that. But as a general rule, if it's wear on the parts, things of that nature, yeah, we're going to replace it and get you back into business. So that's what comes in there. So later on, depending on this next round we assemble, you should have a warranty card in there that you'll be able to fill out, and that's just for FYI information for us. You do not need it. If you bought a brush and don't have the warranty card, all you have to do is just contact help at Reaper Mini. She'll give the instructions. You send it in, and we'll take care of it and go from there. So your proof of ownership is the fact that you have the airbrush. Now, every airbrush, when it comes in, I'm going to use this as one this has been one that's been around. This is actually one that came in. It was a factory warranty work. And so I just ended up replacing the brush and keeping this one. It had really gotten messed up. It was really dirty, so I thought this would be a good chance to figure out all of the nuances of it. So I just replaced them with a new one, and they were happy, and I kept this original one and cleaned it up and got it refurbed, ready to go. And that's sort of my test brush and a lot of junk to do. So now this will be the brush that we're taking apart. And then before we do that, I want to explain your parts and your parts adjustments. So first thing you've got is this right here, this screw. By loosening it, and I'll make sure you can sort of see it there, it's got a knurled edge. When you loosen it, the rod will be able to come out or go in. When you tighten it, it locks the rod in place. Okay, now, then back here, on this piece here, This is your air limiting adjustment, as I call it, an air limiter. Now, what that does is as you pull back on this to feed air into the machine, get it in the way so you can see the trigger here, like that. That's what activates the air and energizes the airbrush. I can limit that by tightening this. So when I tighten it down, and I've got it almost close right to that nut, is what it's going to go up against. The chrome nut is what it's going up against, and it's feeding from the black. That's the limiter. So now when I'm going to go act to energize the airbrush, it only moves this much. And that will help you now as time goes on. You'll develop your own finger and touch and all of that, and that's great. But if you're like me, that comes in real handy. Because if I've decided to start a pattern or do something and I want to keep repeating it and I want it to be close, that's a nice little adjustment to have there. So you can back it out and get it out of the way and run full, whatever you want to do. So that's the first adjustment. Now, the next adjustment is actually the facing of the trigger. As you can see here, there's a grooved edge on the front, and then there's just a normal button edge on the back. You can reverse that. If you want this as your feel touch, or you would rather have that sharp edge as your feel touch, when this is out, you just turn it 180, stick it back in, and that's the other things. And that's just really a preference point for you. Now, whenever I store my airbrush, I always make sure I keep the cap on it. I generally, in this case, I would have my second tube if possible, and if not, I can store it like this. However, what I would do is when I do this, if I don't have an extra container, is I pull my airbrush pin out and then I lock it down. Now, what that's going to do is make sure that it's not engaged to the tip, and any bouncing or tapping and things of this nature will make sure that I don't deform the nozzle at the tip. So now, with it this far out, you're fine and you're not going to get there. But one thing I also want to show is that when you're putting these in, when you get close, I originally had a tendency to just tap, okay? Don't. It doesn't work well. So what I end up doing is to learn it, is I just push it in real slow until I feel the contact. And I don't have to seat it. I don't have to give it any additional pressure. I just feel the contact and stop. It's ready to go. I lock it in. And this is not a lock. This is actually a screw-on thread. But when it's close, you are sort of unlocking and locking it. It takes not very much pressure there. So up front, what you have is this protective cover here. And then this is what it does is when the paint's coming out, this sort of help keeps the air focused around it, what the air that the paint's cutting into, the air itself. A lot of people like to just pull that off and run with the needle, okay? Now, once you've done that, you can do that by pulling, and as you can see, there's the needle tip that was protecting. I say as you can see, you might not be able to see. Put a black background against it. See if I can get it to where, anyway, it's right there. You'll see the tip. So now, when it's what I'm doing is unseating it. When I pull it back, you can't see the tip, but that's why we unseat it and keep it protected. So behind that is this second when it comes off. Now, there's an actual air inlet there that's feeding and things of this nature. You can use this without this particular tip here, and you can flow. And it's really more of what you're trying to do and what you're trying to get. I've done spatters before where I'm looking for paint just to come out in a spatter, okay, and cover a surface to give it a pattern, like coloration dots on the back of a giant ogre or something. You can do it like from that perspective, but that's what that will allow you to do. You also have the ability to run with it off, and that's for the spatters, if that'll do that. Now this, you can't. You have to run the airbrush with this particular one. This is what holds the actual entire assembly together for the nozzle. And I'll repeat this when we go through, so in case you don't see it. Okay, so there's a nozzle tip right there. As you can, I'll put it down so you can see it. So it wants to roll around. It seats inside of this. So that's sort of that covers the adjustments. I'm going to reassemble this so we can go through the whole process step by step beforehand. And anytime you're working on the nozzle tip, pulling it out, doing this stuff I'm doing here, make sure this is out or back, as far, type of thing. You want this out or back. I don't want the tip sticking out of the nozzle. I don't want to play with it. I don't want it in the nozzle if I'm going to be pulling the nozzle off. Especially if it's had paint, it could be gunked in with paint, and I might have to use a little bit of force, and we don't want to dink our needle. So, at this point, we'll be back together. Come on, get it going. And what I'm going to show you next is what I do when any inspector. I inspect them. Michael Collins does inspections. we'll probably train another person to do inspections. So what we do when we do an inspection is we pull it out when we've received it from Badger, and we have the airbrush here. So the first thing, since you're going to have to be able to operate and do all these things, is Ken likes to say they have a bunch of little old ladies that do it, and I'm sure they are, but some of them are stronger than some of the other ones. I do think they have a weight room somewhere up there at Badger. So these can be on really tight. If you have a problem and it's an earlier brush, nowadays we do this for every brush. Some of the earlier brushes we hadn't done this to. So the trick there is just to put some cloth of any kind. I've even used just paper towels. And all you're trying to do is cover up the knurls. And if it's not too tight when you put your pliers on, whatever you're going to do, you should be able to grab it with this cloth and loosen it. Okay. Now, if it still won't loosen there, before you get frustrated and do all of that, you can go to an auto parts store and you can get these. This is nothing more than fuel hose or fuel injection hose, whatever they have. They sell it by the foot. So you're just going to need a few inches of it, and it's so you're just talking a few pennies, and you get that. And there's two sizes. This one happens to be measured in bar, and this one doesn't have a marking on it. Just take your airbrush with you, and you'll figure out what you need. So that's what we will do, is make sure that all and each and every one of these points here, as well as the functionality here, as well as this barrel, and as well as this, are all functioning properly. They're threaded properly. They move in and they move out and things like that. That's the inspection that we do to it. At the factory, they actually shoot water through it or an evaporative, and they do an actual function check on their part. I'm just wanting to make sure all of your disassembly and everything's easy to go. So now what we're going to do is actually disassemble the brush. So I like to sort of do things over in an order, but this time we're just going to sort of work linearly and go from there. So the first thing I'm going to do is loosen this, which is capturing the rod, and I'm going to extract that, the needle. And I'm going to put the needle immediately, before I forget, inside my tube so that it's not out here lost or has the ability to get damaged. So that's out of my way. So this part, we'll just sort of work from this side back. This capture piece. It does, as you've already shown, I've already shown you how it captures the flow of paint. All it is you unscrew it, and when what you're going to find at the end is a small little plastic washer that's attached to it. It's actually not even plastic, it's rubber. And what it's doing is adding just enough friction to this screw-in process here to where when you have adjusted it for the flow of paint, you're ready. It doesn't move. It won't back off. It won't do anything. And I don't know if you can see it, but there's a little irregular shape there. That's just a little rubber grommet that's there for that purpose. It doesn't seal anything. It's only there to hold this. So then the next thing I'm going to do is loosen the back part of the shaft off. And with that, we're going to go ahead and get the capture. Now, the capture, so that you can see it, I doubt it might be too in there. What it is in this threaded part here, there's a slit. And so when this is on side of there and I tighten it up, it compresses that slit, and that's what locks in the back of the needle. So now what we're going to do is skip forward. As you can see, my triggers come out, and that's what I was talking about before. It's not all the way out. It's in enough for me to push back down. But when I push it in like that, just randomly, if it's become unseated, always check it. It should have the ability to move up and down. That means it reseated itself where it needs to be. Now, in the event it just popped out, which seems to happen to me quite a lot, it's a real easy fix. What you have right here is what controls this nozzle here. This is, again, the energizing the paint flow into the gun. You see a little tiny tab that sticks up. That's actually what's resting on the back of the brush and is what's controlling the movement, is that right there. And that's spring loaded by a spring that's captured inside of here. So what I'm going to do is, if this has come out and this is now wonky, if it's like this, you're in luck. All you have to do is just move this back and drop your back in. Now, before I do that, now, this is another trick, is that when I bring it back, I actually move it a little to the left or the right. And then now that's holding this back to the rear and locking it in while this is out. This is something that I've just used to figure out when you're doing it. Now, I can't get a picture down in there that you could see, so I'm just going to draw it for you. When I look down inside of here, straight down in, I'm going to see the top of the air inlet nozzle. And so what it's going to look like to me is a large circle like that, and inside of it, another little circle there, little dot. This is actually a cone shape here that sits on top of this so that when I depress this down, it's opening up the air valve. On the bottom of the trigger itself is a little female indent. This female indent rides on the top of that point and in turn allows it to move back and forth as needed and up and down as needed. So when I put it back in, I need to make sure that is on top of this. It can still go back together, but then obviously it won't work because it won't open this part up and things like that. So that's what I see when I'm down in there. If I'm lucky enough, excuse me, to have had this happen, we have that. And so what I'm going to do is decide, I'm just going to put it in, and I want to make sure the slot is running this way because that's where the needle's got to come through there. So I'm going to drop it on down in. I can see the hole, or I can see that little nipple there. It's got a little shiny ring around it, and I put it in. And notice it's now will move up and down. Okay? At that point, I can just bring it back a little bit and come over, and I just move that to the right a little bit. And when I did, it's now pushing back on the trigger. And so everything's working again. Now, it's not captured because there's no needle going through that holds everything together. So anyway, that's what happens. Now, let's say you're going to get that, and this piece has come out of its slot. Okay? So what you're going to have is, and we're now going to look at the piece so you can understand how to do this. That particular piece there, it has, I'll turn it over here. We'll start on that side. You're going to see a slot right here. That slot is what the needle's going through. So it's going to go through this and go through that slot that's in the actual trigger, and that's, again, holding the whole thing together. That little part that we were seeing that I was grabbing with my finger and moving it happens to be this little T-shaped item above. So what we're going to do, what this piece does, is down in the actual cast manufacture of the body itself, there's actually, there is a groove, like so. And then what I'm going to do is take this bottom curve shape here, the bottom of the curve, and I'm going to place it right here. So in effect, this is what I end up with, this being the T part up here, like so. Okay? I want this little part of that device there to sit down in that groove. That's its pivot point, like this, so it'll swing. The needle is now going to come through it, and it does everything else. This part here is actually in contact with the face of this part. So when I'm doing this, that's the action of the whole trigger moving. That's what's energizing the brush with paint, all opening it all up so it can go. There's a facing in there, you'll see. All I'm wanting to do is make sure this curve of that piece is up against that facing. So the way I do it, or the way you can do it, and it's really up to you, however, is first off, you need to pull this back. And so when I'm holding it like this, and there's not a lot of pressure on this spring here, so you don't have to worry. But I can hold it back like this. And when I'm doing that, it's out of the way, and I simply take this and I drop it in. Let me draw that. Is when it goes in, if this is now the top, this is the top of the airbrush, and here's the hole that we're going for. I want this to actually go in like this. It's going to curve like this with the T up here. So I'm literally going to, excuse me, hit the mic there. It's literally going to go in like this and curve in and get into that notch. So as I've pulled it back, and I've got it up. I'm trying to do this where you can see it too. I take it and I put it in, assuming I can hold on to it here, and it goes down, and I'm looking to find that notch. Now in this particular case, I just dropped it in, but I'm nowhere near it. This is still loose, okay? So in that case, if it actually goes all the way in there, like it did, that's actually good that this is happening, okay? If I can't get it out, I don't want to go grab pliers and stuff like this to start trying to get it out. It's easier at that point to just say, okay, fine, I'm going to pull this part out of the assembly. And this is another way, if you have to go all the way downtown, this is the way to do that. So you can take this, and what we're looking at here is a knurled area, okay? So if you will have a small pair of, and you can find some that are smooth. These aren't smooth. I have some around here that are. But I just need to lightly grab this. This is, again, not working on a car or something. And I just turn it loose. And now this is loose. and it will back off. What I'm catching now, not this little grooved part here, okay, the whole assembly. And then I can take it back and get it out as needed or back it off if I don't want to mess with it. If I don't want to try it, if I can't do this, what you saw me doing where I'm holding it together, you don't want to mess with it like that, you just back this out. Now, we're not going to take it out. I'm going to back it out until I don't feel anything, okay? So right now, it's just in a loose form. At that point, there's nothing pushing on this piece now, and it magically popped back up. Let me make sure here that we've got it. Okay. Boy, it really got boogered up, which is good. And that way you all see it. I've got to see where it goes. Okay. And whatever you do, you don't want to use pliers or anything on this. No. Okay. Now, I was able to just get it to pop out like that. That's one way. But we're going to go ahead and assume that I wasn't able to get that. So what we'll have to do, though, is just take this on out. And it's the spring itself is captured inside itself. So you don't have to worry about a spring is going to come flying out or going anywhere. So with this piece, I'll put it up here and you can see it. It's actually a sub-assembly, and we'll take it apart so that you can see it as well. But this is the piece that's screwing in. As you can see, it's got its threads here threaded to the inside. This is what's going, and when it's lined up, it'll do this. Okay, so now with that out, I can do this and find my piece. It just doesn't want to fall down. There it goes. See if we can coax it on. There we go. Now, normally, I mean, quite honestly, this is rare for it to go this involved, but I'm glad it is so that we can see everything. Now, excuse me, at this point, we can go ahead and without the pressure of the spring, we can get it in there and get it lined up. And if it doesn't, it'll come back out. Okay. So now it's up to the front and it's in there and it's ready to go. And it's in the groove. I can see it in the back. So at this point, I want to now reinstall this part. Now, while we're here at this part, so that you can see, it's a D-shaped part. There's a flat area and then a curved area here. I'll roll it and maybe you can see there's your flat and there's your curve. Now, that becomes important in as much as it's the male portion of this piece, which is actually the actual female part of the D. So when I'm going in to do this, what I want to have to do is make sure it lines up with that to be able to compress. It doesn't have its own, like normally, sometimes you can pull back and lock it into place. That's not going to happen with this. It's just got to do it. But it has to go in. So I'm pinching it, and it goes back in. And at this point, once I get it started, I can let go. And so this can just be free floating, and it all can be free floating. And if you'll notice, my little tab is right there. And so I can take this in, but at some point, with this not lined up and sitting inside the D, the whole assembly is too long. It'll need to come back. And that's where we just basically take that D that you saw there, and you'll have to line it back up to get this fully seated again. So, well, in this particular case, I looked into it. So now you can see it's in the slot and it's going. And we just tighten this on down. And we would use this, but just enough to give it a little bit. We just want to seat it. We're not trying to tighten it, just seat it. At that point, this is now springing again. It's because it now has this pressure against it, in which case I just look down in there and put my trigger back in. Again, the slot and what I'm looking for. So I'm going to go do this. I'm going to pull it back the way I want it. I'm going to look for this. And a lot of times you can just see it and just drop right on it. And then what I'm also using it as alignment, and I'll show you that here in a second, is with the needle down below, the nozzle down below. Now, once it's on it, it's real easy to hit. This is not difficult to hit. Once it's on it, there it is. It's now working again, and it's functioning as well, okay? That's going to be your extreme. If this gets lost, goes down inside, you know, don't let it ruin your day. It can all easily come apart. It can find the piece, and it can go back, and that's how you can do it, okay? So now what we're going to do is actually just go ahead and at this point, continue the disassembly of the thing. So as you've already sort of seen into the future what we're going to do. So we're going to pull that trigger off. And at this point, I'm just going to take this and just undo it like we did. Okay. Then we're going to get our piece. So I've got my piece up here. I've got my rod up here. Now you have this piece here. Inside of here, this assembly is that captured spring. So this is something that you should never need to really have to access. But paint has a nasty way of finding every little space it's not supposed to be in. So if you have to get in here and clean this out, instead of getting a cotton swab and getting in there and messing it, you risk tearing up the spring. That's what this second knurled part is up here. That's what's capturing the spring into this whole assembly. So this lower large knurled part is what we turned to loosen it out of the body. This top part here, I will loosen, and then what will happen is, now, because it's a captured spring a little bit, and it doesn't have much pressure, but I'm not going to risk it. I'm just going to hold this like this, and I'm going to turn this. And the reason is so when this comes loose, I'm actually holding the spring. That's the part. So we don't want the spring to shoot anywhere. So now that it's loose, you can see it's right there. There's nothing to it, but there's the spring. And I'll put it right here so that you can see it right there. And then here's the capture piece that was screwed in to this part, okay? Or actually, in this particular case, it's screwed, down into it. So we'll have that, and we'll have that. Now, that's the paint flow assembly process that goes for that. Now, the next part is that we're going to go to would just be to remove this air valve, and we'll show you how it works. This should be strong finger tight. It's what I usually run it as. Everything on here I run strong finger tight. I want to make sure it's on there well. This is not, because the pressure of the air in the paint, if something comes loose, if this part or whatever, you'll see, you'll know, you'll find out. So anyway, this should just completely screw out like so. And then what we're going to have here at the very top is you should be able to see the needle. That's the plunger that the trigger itself is lining up on. That's the piece you're looking at to get it to do this so that it can push down and so it can rock. So in this plunger, again, you should never need to do this. But if you have to, don't be scared or discouraged about it. Inside of here, you're going to see a slot. And that slot, you just need a small screwdriver. Now, in the event that you go to loosen it, and it doesn't just break loose like that, which was finger tight, because I said I've been through this one before, don't hesitate to hold it like this, do this, and with a small pair of pliers, usually most of your screwdriver handles have these nodules. Just grab a hold of one of those, and then you want to turn. Okay, and that's really it. You want to, and also remember totally, because we had a guy send one in. It's lefty-loosey, righty-tighty is the old saying. So you definitely want to do this. The person was trying to get this whole component off and kept tightening it until it actually broke this entire section off. And then that's why he sent it in for warranty. We warrantied it because there's no qualifications where you need to be a mechanic to run an airbrush, okay? So we took care of that, but that's the kind of thing you want to avoid. It was a little hassle on his part. He didn't get to use his brush for a while, all sorts of stuff. So anyway, what we'll do is we'll take this off just by unscrewing it. And it doesn't take much. And there you go. That's the part there. That's what holds the whole thing together. The next part is this. So we're going to put this up here so you can see it. Okay, that's the plunger that we were articulating off of with our trigger. Here's the spring that was actually manipulating the plunger up and down. This is the little retaining bolt I use the screwdriver on, or cap, nut, whatever we want to call this thing, to pull it out. And then you have the housing itself. Okay, now that's everything out of this housing. That's all that's left. The only last thing, and I'm not going to take it off because you have to actually cut it off to get rid of it, is there's a little tiny rubber washer right here. That is what seals the air. So that functions as a seal. It can wear out. If you find that your airbrush is just sitting in an idle position, you're not pushing anything down, but you're hearing air leak out the tip of it, kind of a thing, then that's the cause, this seal. So to get it off, you're just simply going to have to take a razor blade is what I would use. Let me find one. I had one here. Like I said, take a razor blade, just use the tip off your X-Acto or whatever, and just slice it a little bit to get it off. Or pull it off. You can roll it off. You can use your fingernail. It doesn't really matter. But when you get the replacement piece, it just goes straight down here, and with a little bit of a pinch and a push, it rolls right into the groove. Because that's what's holding it there, is there's a groove in the brass. So at that point, then the things that we have left is, and always try and keep this as your cap just to protect this whole assembly in case you take it out of the pouch and it hits the floor, is you saw this earlier, is we have the first cap. Let me get these pieces over here so I know where I have them. I have that, I have that, I have that. And there's my spring. This is why I like to do that. And then there's my needle. So now I've got this cap. I've got this one that we took off. Okay. Now we'll take off this main cap. Now in the event that, again, you find that when you're taking this apart, I have two size hoses, but you can just use the little paper towel, that's the trick. If it doesn't work well like that for you, do not hesitate to use the hoses. That's what I have these for. So as we're checking them, I can just literally put this over either way, depending on I've got, like that. And then I just take a pair of pliers and I just grab it here and I turn it and it protects everything and it breaks this loose. Okay. These is again, you want these strong finger tight. You shouldn't be tightening these down with pliers. If that's what you're having to do for your seal, I would turn the air pressure down on the compressor. Okay. Now, when this comes apart, this is the nozzle. And then that's the capture to hold the nozzle. And there's where it wants to just seat in. And that's it. The last thing is this is just a plastic cap. You can run it with this cap to hold the paint if you want to. You can also just leave it off, kind of a thing. So now that it's fully disassembled, we'll talk about the cleaning of it real quick. Generally, as I said, I don't take the air plunger down to this level. I might take the air plunger out because paint can get down in here, okay? But I don't ever take it down to this level. I haven't had to yet, but someday I'm sure I will. Everybody has that luck. On the same with this piece here that captures. You shouldn't have to in the tail shaft go get that. One thing I have noticed is that this piece here, during when I'm using it, okay, this is what I said you're going to want to seat it. Once it's fully in the brush while you're using it and it's functioning or doing all its stuff, I have found that, and I'll take my little needle nose pliers or whatever, and on that thick knurl part, I give it just a tiny bit, just a fraction to seat it. Because I have seen that this will back off and get loose, and then it starts allowing air to backflow, and it'll push paint back into this area, okay? And in turn, it messes up a little bit on the output. So in turn, that's the only thing I've run across that might cause paint to get back here in the back. But even then, I've never had to actually disassemble it to the spring level. If you do, you now know how. So now for the reassembly, generally what I always would do is I'll start off with all my sub-assemblies. And we get that together. So I have the 4 pieces here for the air nozzle kind of thing. So in this particular case, the first thing I want to do is drop in the actual needle itself, the plunger needle. And you should have to be able to just drop these in and tap them a little bit with your finger, and it's now popped out right here. So the next thing that's going to go in is the spring, and it's pre-done down in there, so you can see when you drop it in, it's going to land the way you need it to. You're not going to have to orient the spring or rotate it around. The last piece would be the retaining that retains the whole assembly, and it too also sort of sits in there flat ready to go. Now, with screw assemblies, what I found works real well is before I start tightening, I actually back up and reverse. And what I'm feeling for is a small click. And once you've done this several times, you'll know it, and this is true really with any screw, that at that point, I'm now seated in the threads and I can tighten it up. So, and then again, when I tighten it and I get down to the end, I get it flush, and I'm just wanting to make sure it's seated. And so now that it's seated, it's not seated, it's just set. My plunger works, everything's gone. I'm just going to come back with the screwdriver and give it just a little bit. Again, finger, we're not using pliers or anything massive here. So that assembly is now put back together. Then what we're going to do is reassemble this part. This is the paint flow regulation system. So here I have that, I have my spring, and I have this, and I have my retaining, and I have my shaft. Now the shaft part I'm not going to need. Wait, where's my the housing body? Oh, right there, right in front of me. So now this D, the reason that they did the D is that D, the flat part, is what keeps this spring from just sliding out from the front. So when I drop the spring in like that, that's actually what it's resting against. You can't really see it in there, but that's what it's resting is that flat part that sticks out on the D. Now once that's on there, then I just simply take this part and it just screws on internally. And we run it down. And so we have now captured that. And generally, I have not found that I need to actually come back with anything more than finger tight, strong finger tight to hold that. At that point, this is going to slide in and out up at this top. But as you'll notice, because we have the D in there to capture the spring, this isn't moving up and down yet. So I have this flat area, I line it up with the flat part of the D, and now we have a plunging effect like we had before. So at this, what we'll do now is I'll just go ahead and get this in place. We've seen it before, but well, before I do, I need to get this part first because I have to have something for my trigger to land on. So we get it down. And again, strong finger tight is all you need for, I believe it. If you have to start using tools to tighten things down, again, go look at turning down your pressure. And if your pressure is too low now, then you need to look at thinning the paint. And again, that's a different video, but that's how the whole system is designed to sort of work together. I'll take my piece, I'll drop it in down in there. Let's see if I can, yeah. Now, while you don't want to use needle nose pliers to try and get stuff out and bend it and grab it, it doesn't hurt if you want to use them just to place it in there. And that way you could actually see, I guess, easier how I put it in there. Don't have my fat fingers in the way. Let me get it back out. I'll do that again. So I just grab the end of this here. Now I'm just grabbing the tip. You please note that in this top T part, there's a curve here, okay? And I don't want to flatten that curve out. That's what cups up against and maintains the center line on the trigger. So I'm just sort of grabbing it real quick like that. And I drop it in like this, like I was sort of showing with the illustration. And it hits that little groove, and I bring it up forward, and I just let it sit. Okay? And you'll know it's there. I mean, it will not, if you're not in that groove, it's not going to sit there. So you don't have to take it and double check it or anything. At that point, I like to get this done and make sure it's pre-lined up, and that's all fine and well. But if not, and the way I do that is I'm using this to push down, and then this to pinch it. And then that gets me started, and I can go, and at any time I can let go and keep tightening, but at some point I'm going to need to pull back on it. So now at this time you can, if you want to, go ahead and preload the trigger in there as well. My personal and that's not wrong. My personal preference though is I sort of like to make sure that this is all in there, and it's easier to get this fully run down in there and trigger and set up, and then I can pull it and go. Okay, so at this point I'm not tight, but I now have this fully. It's not going to come out of that deconfiguration. So without much spring pressure on it, I can grab the trigger. And again, like I said earlier, I can orient it to this side is what I want to use as my ductile touch, or this side, whatever you're feeling, whatever it works for you, doesn't matter. So at this point, all I have to do is grab this, and I'm going to pull it back and get it into place. And then I tilt it to the left just a little bit. Okay, and if you can get a catch up on that, you can see how I'm not aligned with the main slot. But it's captured at the bottom in the groove. It's now locked there, and it's in place. This allows me, without any panic or worry or headache, to look down in there, find my plunger top, and then just drop this in. And what I do is I reference this piece. that plunger top's in the very center of this, so I can do this and not even look down in there and hit right on top of just like that because I just aimed for the center. And then I let that relax up forward, and then I come back here and I now realign that part there and let go and it comes up, assuming I don't pull up. And that's what I did, is I pulled up. So at that point, I just go back and rinse and repeat. Pull that back, hold it, grab this piece with the pliers or not, doesn't matter. Make sure I have it back far enough. And bring it up. Okay. And this is something too, if you think this is gonna if this step's gonna bother you, then when it's fully dry and like this, sit here and redo this. Do it 5, 10, 20 times, whatever it takes for you to get comfortable. That way, when you have paint, you're in the middle of your project, if this happens to you, you're now not going through a frustrated point. You've done it enough to where you feel good. So back when it's reseated, I can go back in. And there's another way to do it is instead of pushing this back and locking it, is since I know I can reference it there, is I can just come in, and as you can see I'm doing, I'm pushing it back with the needle itself or with the trigger itself, and I'm going in and I'm finding that center spot by just visually lining it up to this. And there we go. So there's another way of getting that reseated in this whole process. So at that point, I now need to be careful because I need to get this all lined in to put together, and I'm holding my brush like this. So first I want to get that in. I do want to get this set, like I said. I don't tighten it like a nut. I just give it a little bit, okay, like that. There we go. Now, then the next thing would be is I want to get this on, okay, and just give it a few turns. You'll feel it tighten up, but then loosen it back because we know we're going to be putting our needle through. Put your back shaft on. There's not a direct orientation for this. Sometimes, depending on how it's threaded, it'll end up like this. It'll end up like this. There's, again, no correct way. It's just a function of to help guard that piece. So there's that. Okay, at that point, then I have my rear part, and I put it back in, and this takes a few turns to get all the way back down there. But you'll see it coming out. This also serves as a rear alignment for the needle itself when it's going in and out. So it achieves that purpose as well. When you're going in and out, you want to be able to do that. Now, because I've got the needle, the nozzle off here, I can go ahead, as you can see, with the needle out, I can turn this and I can hold it upside down and I can do what I want. It's not going to really go anywhere. It'll stay where it is because it's being held by the spring. However, if I bump it, it'll come out. So I'm just going to turn around at this side while it's still like that. I'm going to take the small side of the nozzle here, and I'm just going to drop it right here inside of that. It just sits, and it'll sit there nice for me. And then I take this larger cap, and I just put it on carefully, and it's going to protrude through there. And the cap, when I tighten it, will align everything up for me, like so. Then I can put this on, which is another retainer, that retainer. And then here's our little pattern. So focus point. Now, I mean, at this point, the brush is now back together, sans the needle. So I will go ahead and get a needle. And again, when you're putting it in, you don't want to force it. If it doesn't, when I push and it doesn't want to go, then loosen this. And then come back in until you can find it. And it should really easily go in. And then you just press until it stops. And that's it. And then you want to tighten this. And now your airbrush is back assembled, ready to go. Triggers, goes, everything else. Now, I mean, as you can see, it goes back together a lot faster. It came apart. But that was only because I was showing you all of the stuff to take it apart and trying to point it out to you and stuff like that. It really does disassemble and reassemble. Now, for cleaning purposes, as I said, in those little areas and stuff like that, that's how you get here. Now, what I personally use is just simply water, some airbrush thinner if I have to in the water, and I'll just take a brush to all of this exterior stuff. I just use a brush. Okay, now, when I change colors, this is just my style, is I do what I just shoot through. So if I'm in the middle of doing a pattern and I want to change from brown to green on a camo, let's say, or whatever I'm doing, or if I'm doing a light source priming and doing anything, I want to change from white to black or gray or whatever I'm trying to achieve there, I just simply pour the new color in and I run it. But before I do that, I have a tube, I'll add some water in here. I'll run this to water. Then I will change my color when I start shooting white, even from black. I'll start shooting white, or like if I'm changing from red to white when I don't have any pink left or whatever, I'll just sit there and do that, and then I'm ready to keep going. So once I'm through with my project and my painting, I want to now store this. Well, the last thing you want to do is store it with it dirty. So you'll use your whatever you want to use. There's an airbrush cleaner. You can go in there and it'll recycle it, stuff like that. I use a filter and a garbage can. I take an air conditioning filter and I put it on top of a small little plastic garbage can. I keep between my legs. I can go down there and shoot. It puts all the vapor and does everything in there, and it goes through the little fiber grill and it doesn't come back out. There's all sorts of ways, but you want to run it clean and as clean as possible. At that time, for cleaning purposes, obviously you're going to take the rod out. You don't need to take this, so all you really need to do is back this out. Okay, but if it's clean and we're going to go into storage, go ahead and take it out. And we want to make sure where you're going to see buildup is right along in this area here, not at the tip and not behind it. This area here is going to get covered in paint. The easiest way I've found to clean this, because you don't want to mar this up. The one thing you don't want to do is get a Scotch-Brite or anything like that and start doing this and rubbing this surface and bending it against some other surface, like my finger. I don't want to distort this needle at all. So what I have found that actually works real well is just to simply use my fingernail. It's hard enough to get in here and do this, but light enough to the touch to where I'm just barely doing it. And the abrasion, just take patience, the abrasion will clean it down. Okay? The other part of cleaning is going to occur up here in the nozzle in that area. So you don't have to take all three of these off. You can just take from the back portion forward here, and then here's the needle. Usually after you've shot a lot of paint, the needle's sort of stuck in there, so you've got to take it out. Now at this point, I would shoot air is what I'm doing. And I'll have my finger up here, and I'll put my finger and tap on it. I just want to get everything out I possibly can. Once you've got it washed clean, your cup, everything that you're ready to go, and it looks clean, then I like to do, or I would recommend a final inspection. And that final inspection is to take the time using a light source, hold this up against the light. You want to make sure that the inside of the nozzle is clean. You can see light through it. If you can't, then you're going to need to put something in there and go in. Now, again, you don't want to use this as your cleaning tool, and you don't want to sit there and stuff it. So you just want to put water in there and go from there. If you have to use something abrasive, use a toothpick, the end of a toothpick, just lightly, because it's wood. It's softer than this material, and you can go in there and play with this junk to get it out. It's better to try and just get it out, pick it out, and let it grab pieces and grab itself and pull it out and things like that if you have to do that. There are airbrush cleaning solutions. Use those. Whatever's comfortable for you. The trick is don't go after it with a bunch of tools. Don't go after it with a lot of abrasive, scraping it down, things like that. Now, sonic cleaners. I've used sonic cleaners. They're good. Where a sonic cleaner excels is actually trying to remove large chunks or chunks of something from a surface. It's basically dissolving. It's using a sonic wave to vibrate everything and to take it all down. You can get these small little jewelry vibrators. Now, what I've found though is that you could have to sit in there sometimes for several hours, or however long. They're designed to clean jewelry, usually the little portable ones. So they have an auto timer on there. And that can get frustrating because you're going to notice you need to sit in there for 45 minutes and you got to come back every 15 minutes and restart it because it's there for, for jewelry and just clean that up. It works for that well, but, it's got its own issues as well. There's not a magical thing to it, but you can do that. Once you're all done, the trick is you really want to store the brush dry. You don't want to put oil in there. Oil's not going to work well with your other solvents over long. You would have to clean it all off to be able to get it. You don't want to store it wet. Because as the water evaporates, it's going to have some particulate residue in that water, and it's going to act as concrete to hold the whole thing together. So you do want to store it dry, and you want it to get there. If that means you've got to leave it taken apart and let it air dry, that's fine. You can blow air through it, but that air usually has a moisture content. And so make sure you're always running dryers. Again, that's a different discussion. But, again, take your time, and when you go to store it, just make sure it's dry. Even if it's still got paint residue, if it stores dry, you're a lot better off than trying to make sure if it's still gummy. So anyway, that's for the cleaning side of it. That's generally what I do on that side of it. Now, Where the brush will wear, ironically, is in this nozzle tip right here. What happens is this comes to a triangular point like so, and that's what you're looking at. If you push this rod in there too hard, or you're tapping it in and you do things like that, instead of having a tip at the end, it starts to straighten out at the very tip, not the whole shape, just the very tip will straighten out. And you'll find that this will now start going deeper and deeper and sticking out the end. And it's only because down here at the nozzle tip, instead of it being the tip, you're actually expanding it into a straight shaft. That'll cause spray pattern problems and clogging and all sorts of stuff. So always be careful with the nozzle and things like that. There is a tune-up kit, is what Badger called it. We have it there on the website where you can get new needles and a new nozzle and stuff like that. They'll last for a long time as long as you take care of them. Inadvertently, though, things get dropped, things get lost, things like that happen. So that's on the cleaning side of this, what I would do. And again, it's just back to being careful and going from there. And just drop that on. And we do that. And we have our cover on. And we have that. And the reason I said you can use your paint there, you've got a hole in the top that allows the air to be able to let the paint leave it and stuff like that. So that's up to you. And that's really only if you're used to, if you feel like you're going to have to do this, well, obviously you need that. But as soon as you clog your hole here, that causes other problems. It's quite an adventure, but they are quite a lot of fun across the board. So anyway, and I said, then if you want to keep it because you don't want this coming off while it's stored, you might have an old needle at some point if you replace them, and you can just use that in here. But push it in, make sure it's out, lock it down. Now you'll be able to store it. It's going to stay in there. It's going to stay captured for you. You can put it away, and you can go from there. So the last thing, and I'll go to check my list here. And we did do that. Yeah, the function, the release position, everything. So yeah, make sure you can still do that, and it works. So if you have any questions, you don't hesitate to email me directly, ed@reapermidi.com. I have no problem doing that. I can read with my delete key if I have to. So just send them to me. I'll address them and get to what we can do and whatever we have to do. So that's about it. That wraps it up. Again, hope this helps. I'm it, Justin. I'm out. There you go.